In this video, we'll be reviewing Rework by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson, the founders of Basecamp. A book about management, leadership, getting things done, and running an organization, all in one happy package. Welcome to Strategy Books, introducing leaders to the books and ideas that make a difference, and most importantly, the books that can help you make a difference in the world around you. Hit the subscribe button to stay current, and that bell to be notified every time there's a new video up. I'm Mark Mullally. Follow me here, and you can also connect on Twitter and Instagram at strategy_books. As always, the links to everything we discussed today can be found in the description below. So, let's get started. This is a book that I was attracted to because I've been aware of Basecamp for a little while. I obviously have worked in the field of not just strategy, but also project management. And Basecamp is one of the more interesting project management software packages out there. Less software package, more software as a service. It's a website-based means of getting organizations to be able to collaborate well. What's particularly stood out for me about Basecamp, though, is less the product and more their management philosophy as an organization. Their thought about work and work strategies, how they think about running a company, how they think about employing people, how they think about operating. The fact that they have been principally a remote organization since their founding, and they've been incredibly successful as a startup without following a lot of the traditional startup paths. And I think that's a lot of what also appealed me to me about this book. My understanding said, I admire the company. I've been impressed with how thoughtful Jason Fried has been about work and about management and how he thinks about running a company and managing people and organizing work and structuring and planning work. And so, a lot of the ideas have resonated with me. And so I wanted to actually read the book Rework because it was what was presented as being sort of a synthesis of the management ideas that led to both founding and the success of Basecamp as an organization. And so I was curious about what it had to offer. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. It was not the structure of the other types of books that so far I've been reviewing on the site. It is a book that is and can be read in snippets. There is no section that is longer than a page and a bit. Frankly, it feels like a curated, sifted together collection of blog posts more than it does a cohesive book. You can read it cover to cover. I have read it cover to cover. There's logical sequence, and there's logical order, and there's logical structuring. They've built chapters around specific topics, but then within that chapter, there's no introduction, there's no conclusion, there's a series of thoughts related to that particular topic. And so it's a book that you can actually dive into in any number of instances where you're wanting to refresh your perspective on something, you're wanting to be challenged by something, you're wanting to get a different perspective or viewpoint on how to be able to approach something. It reads cohesively. They've done a remarkable job about having a level of continuity, a thread that actually does run through the overall structure of the book, but it is reading lurch by lurch. It is jumping from specific topic to specific topic in an ordered, organized fashion, but where each individual section really stands alone and can be read alone, and probably at one point was a blog post out there somewhere that was then collated and curated into the book that's there. So it's less a book that reads as a linear passage through thought, building up an argument, exploring it, providing examples. There aren't really a lot of examples they actually provide, so much as it's about perspective and ideas and their management philosophy about how they think about operating an organization. And so the ideas that are there are rooted in the context of their own example as being founders and entrepreneurs of an organization, and one that has been very successful. They have millions of customers. They have significant number of overall installs. They are well regarded in the project management software space, and arguably have been profitable probably from the outset. And so, there's a lot to be able to admire there. There is, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, a level of taking an alternate take, very deliberately taking an alternate take on what it means to manage and what it means to lead and what it means to be able to organize. And to a certain extent, they revel in having a controversial or an alternative view. And that's not wrong. There were many instances where I was quite happily nodding along and agreeing with what they had to say. I didn't always agree with it. I agreed with probably more than I didn't, but there were times when I could find myself and feel myself forming an argument in my head contrary to what was being asserted on the page. But in the main, those experiences were few and far between. It was a refreshing thought about moving past some of the bromides and the articles of faith of startup culture. The idea that you have to grow and keep growing and get big as fast as possible, that you need to hire quickly, that you need to hire on spec knowing you will find work for people. Their basic premise is take it slowly, work progressively, do it yourself until you can't do it anymore, and when it's too painful to keep doing it, then think about hiring them. And at that point, you know the work, you know the role, you can explain it, you can supervise it, you understand what it's going to take to be able to do this. Is this a full-time position? Is this a part-time position? Is this something that you can contract out for? Are there other ways that you might actually organize and structure the work that might either defer or enable you to keep on functioning the way you are with the level of staffing that you have? So there's a lot of very deliberate, thoughtful perspectives around how do you do this sanely? How do you do this humanely? Their overall approach of work culture, their basic premise is when you hire an employee, you're entitled to that employee's effort for 40 hours a week and no more. They should work a normal 8-hour day, and then they should go home and get on with their lives. The idea that rather than embracing entrepreneurial culture of pulling all-nighters and constantly working on problems and moving to get them solved and spending the time and effort to just chase problems down the rabbit hole and get them fixed, their perspective is you lose perspective down the rabbit hole. You are going to get to a point where you are stubbornly trying to solve a problem because it's taken longer than you expected and longer than you wanted, and you're bound and determined that you're going to get it done, as opposed to pulling back, stepping back, getting a different perspective, getting someone else's eyes on it to be able to say, do you see something that I'm not seeing here? Is there another way to be able to approach this? The idea that you should get sleep, get 8 hours a night sleep, that you'll be your most effective, your most creative, your most able to really engage and solve the hard problems as opposed to just solving the problems that you're in front of you that you have the capacity and energy to be able to deal with now. So there's a lot that's actually very sane in the context of the book as well. And there are a lot of just really good reminders for those of us that have forgotten, or prompts for those of us that believe that, it is about how hard you work and how long you work and how many hours that you put in to be able to say, you know what, there's a different perspective and it's not a wrong perspective, and really think about how you're functioning and how you're approaching this. When I read this, I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel the need to be constantly taking notes, capturing every word, writing it all down so that I would remember it. I would read the book nodding a lot, agreeing with a lot, disagreeing with some, being able to pose counter arguments or identify other situations where a different perspective might be of value. But for me, it was partly a useful kind of reminder and prompt of ideas that I have had myself, whether that's about how I work or about how I organize or about how I lead. But it was just a really nice immersion in an alternative view of thinking about management and work, and being willing to take an alternative view and really think about what works, what makes sense for you in the context of your culture, how you function, the work that you're trying to do, how you need to organize, and how you need to be able to do that effectively. And how, when you're doing that, you make sure that you're delivering value, that it's relevant, it's resonant, it's useful, that it has an audience, that you need to build an audience to be able to have a base to be able to serve and a base to be able to grow on that's going to be interested in the work that you do. One of the really interesting things that I got out of the book was the idea of look at your byproducts. The other things that you do that are a natural part of doing the work that you do that other people might be interested in. They use the example of, in movies, for example, behind the scenes trailers. But one of the really interesting ones, and I read it going, I had absolutely no idea that was true. Kingsford Charcoal, largest maker of charcoal briquettes in North America, actually was a spin-off of the Ford Motor Company. And it was about Henry Ford identifying how to be able to make charcoal briquettes from the waste wood that was produced in building the Model T Ford. That was the basis of Kingsford Charcoal Company. And so, it was an astonishing spin-off. I wouldn't have thought of it. I've not heard that story before. I was not aware of that. But it's just sort of a useful prompt of how is the waste of your process, or how is the byproduct of your process? How are the things that you produce as a context of the work that you do able to be used for some other purpose? And so when you're working with wood, you've got waste wood, you've got sawdust that normally you might have just thrown out, and asking the question, how can that be turned into something of value that you can also sell as opposed to simply throwing it out? And it's a little bit different when we think about that in the context of knowledge work, because what are our byproducts? It's about our ideas, it's about our perspectives, it's about our management processes that we build to organize and structure ourselves that others might actually find valuable and useful. And so this book, Rework, is a byproduct of them building and running an organization. It's the thinking and the conversations they've had about how they function, how they operate, that they have now turned into and shared as a book of ideas and perspectives that others can actually take value from. And simply the idea of putting that in the public domain, being willing to share that, recognizing our management perspective is our management perspective. Our ideas are our ideas. You could take everything that's in here and do it. You're not going to build another Basecamp. And if you do, you're merely following us as opposed to leading and innovating. And so rather than viewing that as proprietary information or the secret sauce that makes them unique, why not share it? Why not put it out there? If people find value in it, if people are intrigued by it, that becomes another prompt to be able to grow their audience, that when they are in need of a solution like project management software, they look to Basecamp because they're there reading their blog on a regular basis, because they've read the book, because they value the management ideas, and so they also want to value and understand what else the organization has to offer that might be of value to them. So, as I say, it's a really interesting book of different ideas and different perspectives and different takes. I'm going to share with you one of those now, and we're just going to dive in and talk about the idea of the perspective of making a dent in the universe. And this is an idea that is not specifically theirs. The frame of the phrase "make a dent in the universe" that actually comes from Steve Jobs. But what they talk about is, to do great work, you need to feel that you are making a difference, that you're putting a meaningful dent in the universe, that you're part of something important. That doesn't mean you need to find the cure for cancer. It's just that your efforts need to feel valuable. You want your customers to say, "This makes my life better." You want to feel that if you stopped doing what you do, people would notice. You should feel an urgency about this too. You don't have forever. This is your life's work. Do you want to build just another Me Too product, or do you want to build to shake things up? What you do is your legacy. Don't sit around and wait for someone else to make the change you want to see, and don't think it takes a huge team to make that difference either. Look at Craigslist, which demolished the traditional classified ad business. With just a few dozen employees, the company generates tens of millions in revenue as one of the most popular sites on the internet. and disrupted the entire newspaper business. The Drudge Report, run by Matt Drudge, is just one simple page on the web run by one guy. Yes, it's had a huge impact on the news industry, television producers, radio talk show hosts, and newspaper reporters routinely view it as the go-to place for news stories. If you're going to do something that matters. These little guys came out of nowhere and destroyed old models that have been around for decades. You can do the same in your industry. That is a perfect example of what they offer as I say, snippets. It's like blog posts. It's like the idea around a cohesive thought expressed simply, clearly, thoughtfully, with some illustration, often not, but that is a prompt to think. And it can really be used as this. You can, as I say, read it from cover to cover, but you can actually really just use it as a basis of meditations around your own management process, your own thoughts about leadership, about hiring, about managing employees, about getting work done, about thinking about the work that you want to do. And so it's less something that you necessarily need to read cover to cover, although you certainly can, so much as there's some useful reminders and some useful thoughts and some useful just prompts for thinking. What it does do is communicate their philosophy and their perspective and their ideas about how they manage and how they function and how they've organized and led Basecamp. It doesn't tell you how. It's not going to give you the specifics of, and here's how to actually go about doing what we do, or here's how to go about applying these ideas. It is very much about their philosophies. It's about their perspectives. It's about their viewpoints about what works for them. But making it work for you is still going to require effort. It's still going to require thought. And the thing is, your thoughts may actually be different. You may use this as a launching point to say, interesting perspective, and you may also use it as a launching perspective to be, or a launch platform to be able to say, interesting perspective, but whichever that is entirely appropriate. The ideas are there to be able to take or not. The ideas are there to be able to reflect on, to be able to consider, to be able to react to, and say, what if this actually makes sense for me? Where do I get value out of the philosophy here? So it's not a how-to. It's not a immersive guide to their thought and thinking and management style. It's a book that you can read in probably 2 or 3 hours at most, a couple of sittings if you go all the way through. It's a book that can serve you on an ongoing basis by just diving in where any one segment of the book takes probably a couple of minutes to work through, but can give you inspiration and thought that would then serve you well for an hour or the next day as you go about your business and contemplate, how do I actually solve this problem or address this? So would I recommend reading it? If you are an entrepreneur, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, you're going to get information of value from it. I think it's a useful book. I think it's a thoughtful book. I think it's a book with a number of ideas that are relevant and resonant, and that I would encourage people to be able to take value from. I would encourage them to challenge themselves, though, in terms of doing it. It's not a deep book. It's not going to require a lot of work on your part to be able to understand what they're saying or what they're recommending. If you wanted to be able to take and leverage some of their ideas, there is work you're going to need to do in terms of thinking about, what would that look like for me? How would I do that? What would my approach actually be to be able to take that on? Because, as I say, they don't provide the how-to. They provide the what, and they provide the what has worked for them. They provide the why it has worked for them. But the how do you get there, the what does that look like, that is still an exercise for you to be able to figure out. It is a book that I will probably go back to at some time in the future. They have a number of other books. Some of them are free on the Basecamp site. Others are, again, for sale, and you can find at your local bookseller. But as I say, their management perspective is interesting. The success they've had as an organization is impressive. And the ideas that they share, while perhaps not as controversial as they'd like to position them as being, are thoughtful and well-considered, and a reasonable, sane, and innately humane way to be able to think about running an organization. So I think it's a book of value. I think it's a book that I'm glad that I did pick up and had the opportunity to be able to work through. I read it going, I'd like more. I'd like more depth. I'd like more insight. I'd like more examples of, so how did you apply this? Or give me an illustration or a how to approach that. It could go deeper. It could go a lot deeper. But for what it is, it provides food for thought, and that's value enough in itself. So that is the review for this week. I'd like to thank you so much for, again, joining us on Strategy Books. Thank you for being here. We'll be back with another episode soon. If you're interested in the books we talked about, you can find links to them in the description below. Be sure to subscribe as well. If you enjoyed today's recording, please hit that like button as well. Help others to be able to find the recording. Let me know what you got out of the book in the comments below. Comment as well if you have questions or if you have ideas for a future book as well. That's it again for this week. We'll see you soon on another episode. Thank you for joining us at Strategy Books.